South China Sea, a vast blue expanse that looks peaceful from above, but beneath its waves lies one of the most dangerous and complicated power struggles in modern history. And right now, the Philippines is back at the center of it. Every few years, the headlines return: a collision at sea, a standoff between ships, a warning from Beijing, a statement from Manila. But this time, it feels different. This time, the stakes are higher, the tone sharper, and the history behind it deeper than ever before. Our goal on this video is 500 likes. And don't forget to subscribe and join us as we uncover more hidden story of Philippines history. The last time a Filipino ship faced off against Chinese vessels, the world held its breath. Now it's happening again. But this isn't just a modern news story, it's the continuation of a centuries-old struggle over territory, identity, and survival. To understand why the Philippines is back in the South China Sea headlines, we need to dig deep into the history that built this tension brick by brick, wave by wave. Let's start with something simple: geography. The Philippines is an archipelago of more than 7,000 islands, scattered across one of the most strategic waterways on Earth. To the west lies the South China Sea, or as Filipinos call it, the West Philippine Sea. It's not just a sea, it's a lifeline. Around one-third of global trade passes through here every single year. Beneath its waters lie enormous oil and gas reserves, rich fishing grounds, and sea routes that connect Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. Whoever controls these waters controls the heartbeat of Asia's economy. But long before modern maps and satellites, these waters were part of everyday Filipino life. Fishermen from Palawan, Zambales, and Mindoro sailed to reefs and shoals that their ancestors had known for generations. They didn't think in terms of borders or exclusive zones. The sea was theirs, as natural as the land they lived on. That all changed when foreign empires arrived. When Spain colonized the Philippines in the 1500s, they didn't just seize the islands, they claimed the surrounding waters too. Colonial maps were drawn not by understanding geography, but by asserting power. If a European flag flew there, it was theirs. Centuries later, when the United States took the Philippines after defeating Spain in 1898, they inherited the same colonial mindset: draw lines, define boundaries, and control what lies within. But in this region, defining the sea was far more complicated than drawing a line on paper. After World War II, Asia's colonial empires collapsed, leaving behind confusion and unfinished business. Japan's defeat in 1945 created a vacuum, and suddenly, the reefs, islets, and rocks of the South China Sea became prizes in a race for control. China claimed almost the entire sea, drawing what became known as the Nine-Dash Line. The problem? That line ignored the existence and rights of other nations, including the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. For the Philippines, the issue became personal in the 1970s. A Filipino adventurer named Tomas Cloma laid claim to a group of islands in the Spratlys, calling them the Kalayaan Island Group, or Freedomland. Years later, the Philippine government formalized that claim, arguing that these islands lay well within its 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, something recognized by international law under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. But China didn't back down. In fact, it began building artificial islands, outposts, and military bases, transforming once uninhabited reefs into fortified positions. By the late 2000s, Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels began appearing regularly in waters claimed by the Philippines. What had been a distant territorial issue was now turning into a national crisis. Then came 2012, the year of the Scarborough Shoal Standoff. Filipino fishermen were blocked by Chinese ships from entering a traditional fishing ground just 120 miles off the Philippine coast. It wasn't just a local incident, it was a message. China's presence was permanent, and anyone who challenged it would face the full weight of its maritime power. The Philippines tried diplomacy, then legal action. Manila filed a case before the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, arguing that China's Nine-Dash Line had no basis in international law. 4 years later, in 2016, the verdict came, and it was a historic one. The court ruled in favor of the Philippines, declaring China's sweeping claims illegal. It also affirmed that the Scarborough Shoal and the Spratly features lay within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. For a moment, the Philippines stood tall. It was a small nation that had defeated a superpower through the rule of law, but the celebration didn't last. China simply ignored the ruling, continued to build military installations, and increased its patrols in disputed areas. The world, despite its words of support, did very little. For ordinary Filipinos, especially fishermen, the legal victory changed nothing. They were still harassed, blocked, and sometimes rammed by Chinese vessels. Their catches dwindled, their livelihoods shattered, and the sea that once fed generations was now filled with fear. Yet, even in that fear, the spirit of resistance grew. In recent years, especially from 2023 onward, the Philippines began pushing back harder. With new leadership and growing frustration over China's aggression, Manila strengthened its defense ties with allies like the United States, Japan, and Australia. It opened military bases to joint exercises, increased patrols, and even installed floating barriers to mark its territory. These moves reignited global attention, and the South China Sea once again exploded in headlines. But behind the modern headlines are deeper echoes, historical patterns that seem to repeat. The Philippines has always found itself caught between greater powers. Under Spain, it was a pawn in Europe's Asian ambitions. Under the US, it became a key military outpost in the Pacific. During World War II, it was ravaged between Japanese occupation and American liberation. And today, it stands once more at the crossroads of East and West, squeezed between China's expansion and the promises of Western allies. This pattern is what makes the story both tragic and inspiring. Each era brings a new struggle, yet the Philippine identity endures. The same courage that fought colonizers and invaders now fuels the defense of reefs and shoals. The same spirit that drove independence movements now drives the call for sovereignty at sea. And while politicians argue, soldiers patrol, and diplomats negotiate, the human stories continue. Filipino fishermen wake before dawn, knowing that the sea that raised their families might no longer be safe. They sail with courage, knowing they might be chased or harassed. Some never return. For them, the South China Sea isn't a political debate, it's life itself. Beyond the waves, the sea carries something more symbolic. It represents how small nations struggle to be heard in a world still ruled by might. It's about fairness, justice, and dignity. When the Philippines stands its ground, it's not only defending its territory, it's defending the idea that international law should mean something, that the weak still have a voice, even when the strong ignore it. The recent years have also shown how the Philippines' stance is reshaping alliances. Countries like Japan and Australia have provided defense aid, and the United States has reaffirmed its commitments under the Mutual Defense Treaty. Even nations that once stayed neutral are beginning to speak up, recognizing that what happens in the South China Sea affects the world's stability. But for every act of defiance, there is uncertainty. The Philippines knows that standing up to a giant like China has risks, economic, political, even military. Yet it also knows that silence carries a greater cost, the loss of identity, pride, and freedom. The story of the South China Sea is therefore not just about borders. It's about belonging. It's about how a nation of islands, once divided by colonizers and bound by the sea, is once again fighting to define who it is and where it stands. From the galleons of the Spanish era to the patrol boats of today, from colonial charts to modern satellite maps, the Philippine struggle has always been the same: to be seen, respected, and free. And this is why the Philippines is back in the headlines today, because every reef, every shoal, and every square mile of ocean carries a piece of its soul. Because this isn't just a fight for territory, it's a fight for memory. For the right to say, this is ours, this is who we are, and we will not disappear beneath the waves. The South China Sea isn't just a map. It's a mirror reflecting centuries of ambition, betrayal, and resilience. When you look closely, you see that the story hasn't changed, only the names and the ships have. And as tensions rise once again, history quietly reminds us, the Philippines has stood here before, and somehow it always finds a way to endure. So the next time you see the Philippines trending because of another standoff or another confrontation at sea, remember what's really at stake. It's not just oil, not just fish, not just politics. It's legacy. A legacy written by fishermen, by soldiers, by ordinary people who refuse to be erased by the tides of history. This is why the Philippines is back in the South China Sea headlines, not because it wants conflict, but because it refuses to surrender its story. The story of a nation surrounded by giants, yet brave enough to stand on its own, no matter how rough the waters get. And if you've made it this far, you now understand something most headlines miss. This isn't just about today's disputes. It's about 500 years of history repeating itself, and a people who refuse to let go of their sea, their dignity, and their place in the world. Because at the end of the day, the South China Sea doesn't just belong to those with the biggest ships. It belongs to those with the deepest roots. And the Philippines, its roots run deep.